King Jarvan II wanted to expand Damasia's trade with other countries, but did not wish for foreigners to freely enter the city easily. He had thus initiated plans to build a port town, starting with a bridge built southward from the city to the sea. The bridge ended on a larger islet with a rock mass protecting it from the harshness of the sea. The entrance of the town was located above the cliff. There was enough space to build a port in a small cosmopolitan town where the most eloquent negotiators of Demacia lived. Heavily guarded by the Blue Cloaks, Demasia's soldiers, this small island had rapidly developed into a noteworthy town. Despite its status as a port where businesses and people moved quickly, Harbor Island was very secure, a far city from the stories sailors would tell about the savages of Bilgewater. Eleanor quickened her pace. Her parents had held her back, once again subjected to the same discussion and reproach as her daily routine. While rushing to her destination, she narrowly avoided colliding with an old lady carrying a bag. But the thought was quickly forgotten when she finally reached the grand gate that allowed entry to the bridge connecting Demasia's White City to Harbor, the port island to the south.
"Halt there, madam!"
A guard stopped her as she entered the bridge at its entrance.
"For what reason does a person of your status travel to Harbor?"
Are you a newcomer, sir?
Said Eleanor with a smile.
I work there. You'll see me again tomorrow and the following days.
"Nonsense!"
replied the soldier, shaking his head and denying her entry.
"Let her pass, Rook,"
said an old soldier with an impressive mustache.
"You're gonna make her late."
Hello and thank you, Mr. Voltel.
She greeted while waving her hand. Eleanor was running with long strides. She was out of breath, her lungs were burning. The guard at the gate had held her back for too long, and now she was officially late. She took the bridge from the city to reach the tavern in Harbor every day, which was at the end of the main street, almost by the docks. She ran with all her might. Mr. Flaherty didn't like tardiness. She jumped over the small railing to avoid the crowd of people chatting and clung to the wall to finally descend the street and arrive at the square. Merchants were negotiating arrivals while sailors unloaded large wooden crates and barrels filled with various goods. Eleanor stopped for a moment, observing the square left and right with a big smile on her face. She loved Harbor, from the captains shouting at the merchants trying to lower prices to the sailors singing while they worked. Snapping out of her delight, she remembered her tardiness and resumed her race. After crossing the square, avoiding a few busy sailors, and passing one of the overly expressive traders who had been asked to calm down by the guards, she finally arrived at the tavern door. She discreetly pushed open the door of the tavern, which tinkled the small bell.
"You're late, my dear,"
reproached a slightly portly old man.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Flaherty. A guard held me up at the main gate.
"They'll see you pass every day. What do they want from you this time?"
Nothing too serious, sir. A new guard at the gate who wouldn't let me through. Mr. Boltel had to intervene to clear the way. I was already a bit late and it didn't help.
She replied with a small smile.
Well. That's not a big deal. All right, go and get ready to welcome our first customers. 2 big caravels are supposed to arrive today. It's gonna be good for business.
He rubbed his hands together and grinned, revealing yellowish teeth, one missing on the side.
Aye, Cap'n.
Eleanor replied with a big smile. She knew that deep down her boss had a good heart. Mr. Flaherty, an ex-sailor, was just strict about the rules. She hurried to the counter, sliding over it instead of going around it, and put on her apron. She grabbed a cloth and started wiping the tables that had seen one too many drinks the night before, and casually began humming the same tunes she regularly heard on the port during her break. Throughout the day, Eleanor found herself immersed in hearing the life stories of the people who came to the tavern. From sailors who recounted their sea adventures to friends laughing heartily over a fresh pint. Most of the day's transaction took place in the tavern. Each order was an opportunity for travel and adventure, a moment where she witnessed the joys and troubles that inhabited her customers' hearts. Toward the late afternoon, Eleanor saw the tavern empty out and people running in all directions across the port. The atmosphere in harbor was electric. 2 massive caravels had just entered Demasia's waters and were preparing to dock at the port. Eleanor excitedly turned to her boss.
I'm taking a little break, Cap'n.
She called out with a big smile.
Don't wander too far, it might get crowded.
Yes, I know, don't worry.
The boss didn't even have time to hear the end of Eleanor's sentence. She was already running to cross the square. She lifted and grabbed her dress without hesitation with her arms, climbing the stairs of one of the small towers located on each side of the port, 2 by 2, and finally climbing the parapet. She overlooked the entrance of the port and could hear the sailors shouting, throwing ropes, and finish hoisting the sails. She waved her arms in the air to greet them. She let her arms fall to her sides, closed her eyes, and deeply inhaled the scent of the sea while dreaming of adventures beyond. The sky gradually changed to fiery oranges and delicate pinks dancing to accompany the sun descending majestically on the horizon, casting shimmering reflections on the waves. It was time for Eleanor to prepare for the evening service and welcome these new arrivals and their stories. As the night enveloped the tavern with its dark embrace, the rumble of voices and boisterous laughter escaping from stone walls foreshadowed a lively night. With determined steps, Eleanor went from table to table, juggling between orders and service. Eleanor grew used to this frantic pace. With Mr. Flaherty, they had developed a small system using bits of paper and numbered tables to save time.
Cap'n, put on your spectacles. It's not the time to make mistakes with orders.
Eleanor shouted towards the counter.
Oh, come now. Maybe it's you who made the mistake.
Mr. Flaherty retorted with a pout. Some customers burst into laughter upon seeing the elder put 2 huge glasses upon the tip of his nose. The faces of the customers passed before Eleanor in a blur. A symphony of smiles, playful glances, and demanding furrowed brows were all brief but noteworthy to her. The evening was going well despite the fatigue, and Eleanor's face didn't reveal anything behind her smile. The final chime of the port's belfry announced 11 o'clock when suddenly a shiver overcame Eleanor. Sweat beaded along her back, sending a chill down her spine. Her palms were sweaty and trembling. She almost spilled the tray from the table she had just cleared. She made her way back to the counter with difficulty and scanned the room with a glance. She couldn't shake off the feeling until Mr. Flaherty brought her out of her thoughts.
What's happening, my dear? You're as pale as my underworld never was.
Probably just tired, Cap'n.
No wonder. What are they? You've been fantastic. Go rest up. I'll take care of ushering out the last customers with a swift kick in the onions.
Very well, sir. No objections from me. I'll clean these last 2 tables and hand in my apron for the day.
Eleanor regained her composure. Mr. Flaherty knew how to rally his troops. He wasn't an ex-sailor for nothing. She laughed, watching him lift and escort 2 drunks to the door.
Firm but kind-hearted,
she chuckled. She stacked the last mugs, tossing them over the counter. A wipe here, another there, and the last 2 tables were clean in no time.
All right, that's enough, Eleanor. Cleaning is for the morning.
She slipped the strap of her apron over her head and hung it on the wall behind the counter.
I'm off. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, and don't be late this time.
She jingled the doorbell, looked at Mr. Flaherty while laughing, and stepped out into the square. The fresh and damp air filled Eleanor's lungs, mingling with scents of salt, fish, and damp wood. Waves crashed against the docks, creating a gentle lapping sound that intertwined with the wind's whisper in the sails of the moored boats. She crossed the square to reach the main tent. At the top was the access point to the bridge that connected harbor to the city center of Demacia. She encountered a patrol of blue-cloaked guards with torches in hand, escorting two men who had indulged a bit too much in drinking. She greeted them as she passed by and with long strides and reached the main street. It was dark, but illuminated on either side by small lanterns casting shadows on the walls that danced with the breeze. Every evening she walked up the street, past the parapet, and turned left to reach the bridge. Mr. Flaherty had asked why she didn't come to stay in harbor, saying it would make her life easier.
I'll even talk to your parents if necessary,
he had insisted. It wasn't for lack of trying. She had asked them countless times. Their response was always the same. People of our status have no business in that den of ruffians and liars. A distinctive little laugh, so melodious, came to caress Eleanor's ears and pulled her out of her thoughts. She stopped for a moment to search for the source.
Curious,
she murmured. The enchanting and fleeting little melody seemed to have come from above the rooftops of the main street. Unusual, she thought. The main street was quiet at this hour. Who could be laughing like that at such a height? Eleanor searched for the source of the laughter without success. She continued on her way, now catching sight of the stairs that led to the bridge at the end of the street. Once again, that uncomfortable sensation weakened her legs. She stopped again to look behind her. The street was empty, with only vaporous shadows of flames from the lanterns dancing on the walls for company. She brought her hands to her face and briskly patted her cheeks.
Come on, no time to waste,
she said, giving herself one last tap on the cheek. She started climbing the stair steps 2 by 2, her eyes focused on her feet to not miss a step. As she rounded the parapet to reach the bridge, she collided with something. She looked up and realized she had just bumped into a person.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She didn't have the time to finish her sentence. Her breath became rapid and shallow. Each breath inhaled was difficult, as if the air was running out. She cautiously raised her head to see the person she had bumped into. It was a man with long dark hair falling in front of his face. He was pale with a several-day-old beard. Those traits didn't bother Eleanor much compared to the chilling smile he wore. She tried to take in as much of the man behind the smile until her hands trembled and instinctively neared her stomach. She experienced hot and cold sensations, feeling warm liquid run over her skin even though she felt very cold. She tore her gaze away from the man's smile and lowered her eyes. He was firmly gripping the handle of a hunting knife. Eleanor felt faint when she looked down to see that her hands were covered in blood. He quickly withdrew the knife, and her wound started bleeding profusely. Eleanor's mind was screaming, begging her to flee, but her legs refused to respond. The man stabbed her 3 times more before fleeing towards the main street. Eleanor's legs could no longer support her. She collapsed, her back hitting the cold wall. She had no strength left, none left to even utter a sound. Her hand rested on the knife the man had left lodged in her abdomen before making his escape. Eleanor's life trickled down her skin, soaking her clothes in crimson before pooling onto the pavement.
Blood,
a voice grumbled.
No being was supposed to encounter us today, my capricious companion.
I smell the scent of a hunt.
Eleanor no longer felt anything except the cold that consumed her. Her vision blurred. She couldn't make out the 2 silhouettes that had appeared before her.
Poor little thing. The choice was not offered to her.
Our mark is not upon her.
A dark figure spoke in a hoarse voice.
Indeed, my dear wolf. We do not know this name.
A white form approached Eleanor. She could only clearly distinguish its eyes, which were of a blazing and icy blue.
Should we accept a hunt without our consent, my dear wolf?
The white form said with a level of anger in its voice.
I hunt.
The dark form fervently replied.
That's what I thought, my companion.
Approaching Eleanor's face, the blue eyes changed color and turned a shade of gold. The surroundings illuminated. Simultaneously, the cold left Eleanor's body as a breath of life surged through her. The veil before her eyes dissipated. She could now distinguish the two forms in front of her.
Who are you?
She asked.
We have many names, but here we are known as Kindred.
The hunters? I've heard stories about you. I didn't think you were real.
All know who we are, but wish to forget. In due time, all shall know us.
Was it my time? Is that why you're here?
Eleanor questioned in a small voice. Lamb remained still, but Wolf's growl petrified the young girl.
We don't know your name, my child.
She looked at the wolf, not understanding. Eleanor could only see his piercing blue eyes through the darkness.
My name is Eleanor, Mr. Wolf.
She said timidly.
Eleanor is a beautiful name. Tell us what happened.
The young girl still had one hand on the knife in her abdomen. She no longer felt pain. Her wounds were still open, but no longer bleeding, as if time had stopped. Eleanor sat up the best she could against the wall and looked successively at Wolf and Lamb. Both of them had masks on their faces. Wolf's white mask depicted a lamb with a distinct mark on its forehead, while Lamb, who was beside Eleanor, wore a mask of wolf. The same mark was on her forehead, but reversed. Placed side by side, the two marks formed an infinite whirlpool where shadows and light intertwined. Lamb's eyes, however, were still a shade of gold, bathing Eleanor in their radiance. Eleanor began her story.
The day started with an argument with my parents that horribly delayed me for work. The day unfolded like any other, despite the service being much busier than usual due to the two caravels arriving later in the day. The only strange thing was this discomfort I felt during the evening service. I thought it was fatigue, but again, I had this unpleasant sensation before encountering the man at the top of the stairs.
Wolf growled from the darkness and extended a paw, revealing only his head.
Little lamb,
he growled.
Yes, my dear wolf. This young one possesses talents.
Talents?
Eleanor exclaimed.
No, I'm just an ordinary girl who's going to die.
Instinct does not deceive,
Wolf said, raising his voice.
My companion is right, young Eleanor. You have qualities that would make you a good hunter. We offer you the opportunity to confront the man you met earlier.
But I can't move anymore,
she said, perplexed at their offer.
We offer you this choice. Stand up now,
Lamb insisted. Eleanor locked her gaze with Lamb's. It was piercing, precise, capable of discerning everything, even Eleanor's soul. Unwavering courage and determination took hold of the young girl. She placed her hand, covered in blood, on the normally icy ground, but felt no cold. She noticed strange symbols on the ground, with a larger one in the center that oddly resembled those worn by Wolf and Lamb. Not dwelling on it any further, Eleanor stood up, determined. She grabbed the knife by the handle with both hands and, not without difficulty, removed the blade. No pain was felt. No drop of blood flowed from the open wound.
Yes, please give me a chance.
She looked at Lamb fervently. Her hand tightened firmly around the knife's handle, causing it to turn white.
This is going to be fun,
Wolf growled. Lamb's eyes returned to their icy blue, while Eleanor's irises took on a golden glow. Lamb approached Wolf in the darkness, placing her hand on his cheek to whisper a few words in his ear. Eleanor was surprised by such tenderness between them. She couldn't hear what they were saying and turned her gaze toward her wounds and the knife she held tightly in her hand. Her desire to find that man was strong. She wanted to know why he had murdered her.
This man is very easy to find,
Lamb assured.
I can smell him. A mixture of blood and salt.
Eleanor turned to face the main street. The man had fled that way in that direction a few moments ago.
All right.
She said to herself to gather courage.
Kindred's mark is on this man, so we leave it to you to decide what will happen,
Lamb told her. She distanced herself, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Like an automaton, Eleanor walked to the main street, one step after another. She was lost in her thoughts. Her mind was in turmoil. Eleanor tried to recall what that man looked like, details that would help her piece together the puzzle and allow her to find her assailant. She wiped her free hand on her dress and passed it over her tired face, taking a deep breath to focus herself. The blurry memories of the scene began to surface. The first thing Eleanor remembered were the man's boots, worn and covered with a pale white film. He also wore dark-colored breeches and a loose shirt with a red jerkin. What had struck Eleanor was the man's unsettling smile. His teeth and gums were badly damaged, a prominent characteristic of sailors. Her hands trembled. She clenched her fists, took in the humid air in a deep breath, and strode down the street in long strides. A light mist hovered over the dock's dark waters. The moon, radiant and full, stood majestically in the sky, casted its silvery glow upon the tranquil waves. While the entire port was asleep, Eleanor noticed tiny drops of blood on the ground ahead of her.
I'm right. This man had indeed passed through here.
She glanced around, but there was no man in sight. Where could the man have taken refuge? After several days at sea, sailors wouldn't stay on the ships, but would instead enjoy the solid ground and pleasures a port could offer. Could this man have sought refuge in an inn despite the late hour? Inns on busy days like this were often fully booked and didn't accept last-minute arrivals. Her gaze swept the area once more when an idea crossed her mind. The man was a sailor. Could he have found refuge on one of the ships that had docked today? But which one? A soft chuckle shimmered in the night, and she spotted Lamb perched on the mast of a ship. She headed towards the two caravels at the end of the jetty.
So I was right.
She whispered.
I know you're here. Assassin! Coward! Show yourself!
Eleanor shouted. A head appeared behind the wooden railings of the ship. The man Eleanor was looking for widened his eyes, his silhouette discernible in the moonlight.
I finally found you,
Eleanor said coldly. She climbed onto the ship's deck using the planks that the sailors had placed earlier in the day to unload their cargo. She faced the man, only a few steps apart. She threw the knife towards the man. The knife's blade embedded itself into the wooden deck of the ship just a few inches from his feet.
Here, I believe you forgot this,
she said, pointing at the knife. No fear, no apprehension, Eleanor remained impassive, both in her voice and on her face. The man, on the other hand, had his eyes wide open, mouth slightly agape, completely frozen.
How is this possible?
He mumbled.
What's happening? Do you think you're seeing a ghost?
She said with a hint of sarcasm. She directed her hand towards her chest and tapped her torso.
See, I'm very much alive. The coward that you are should make sure of that.
The man didn't move. Eleanor noticed that he was experiencing small spasms and tremors.
Now, I want answers. Why did you do this?
She asked firmly. The man didn't respond. He had clasped his hands and was frantically wringing his fingers.
I'm listening,
she told him, raising her voice.
Wealthy people hired me. They can't stand this place. They want it gone, so they don't have to see any outsiders.
The man struggled to speak and catch his breath.
Continue,
she ordered.
Even worse,
The man continued.
their daughter works here, a bourgeois girl working in a port. It's the ultimate disgrace. Farewell to our social status. They felt they had to do something.
Eleanor's initially impassive face began to crumble. She realized that her own parents had commissioned her assassination to protect their status. The man's face morphed when he saw Eleanor shaken by his words. Once again, Eleanor saw that icy smile on the man's face. He was no longer trembling.
They want to pin the blame on a sailor protecting their status and shutting the door on outsiders. I find their plan rather well crafted. They didn't spare any expense. I'm leaving with a comfortable sum. I'll be able to enjoy women and drinks to my heart's content.
Scarcely had he finished his sentence when the man bent down to retrieve the knife and lunged at Eleanor. He raised his arm towards the sky, poised to bring the knife down on Eleanor's chest, aiming for her heart.
This time, I won't miss you.
He spat at her. She welcomed him with open arms. The words and betrayal of her own family had left more scars on Eleanor than the knife. Still taken aback by his words, she recalled Wolf's words. The blade plunged into her chest, but nothing happened as the man had expected. Eleanor grabbed the man's hand, and his malicious smile vanished instantly. He struggled to escape Eleanor's grip and took several steps back. She pulled the blade out of her chest, feeling no pain. Her heart bled from the betrayal, but not from the blade that had pierced it. She gripped the knife's hilt with all her might, raising it to strike the despicable man. She took a step forward, then changed her mind and dropped the knife to the ground.
You know what? I made some new friends today.
Eleanor smiled at him.
I'm quite sure one of them would really like to meet you.
She paused and looked at her surroundings.
Am I not right, Mr. Wolf?
She addressed the shadows.
I told you, Mr. Wolf, I am not a hunter. I will not stain my hands with blood for such a pathetic individual.
A growl resonated through the wooden planks of the boat, and two eyes of icy blue emerged from the shadows. Wolf, imposing and majestic, positioned himself behind Eleanor.
Lamb told me to be patient. I don't like to be patient. But she said you would surely offer me a hunt.
I offer it to you willingly, Mr. Wolf. Have fun.
Eleanor stepped back to make way for Wolf.
You should start running.
She whispered to the fear-stricken man in front of her. In panic, the man jumped over the railing and plunged into the water. He swam to the edge and clung to it, hauling himself out of the water. Wolf sank his fangs into his arm and lifted him out of the water with a simple shake of his head. He clenched his jaws and crushed bone and flesh. In a spray of blood, the man landed on the ground with one arm missing. Once again, Wolf pounced on the man and tore off the other arm as easily as if he were playing with a twig. Eleanor watched the gruesome spectacle with tears in her eyes. Lamb joined Eleanor near the railing.
You made Wolf happy tonight, dear Eleanor.
How much time do I have left?
Eleanor asked in a soft voice, her eyes fixed on the grim spectacle Wolf presented.
The way we leave this world reflects how we've journeyed through life. When the first rays of the sun touch your face, it will be time.
Thank you for your help.
She addressed her final words to Lamb with a small smile.
I'll go home to rest.
Eleanor left the boat and thanked Wolf with a nod. She crossed the square and stepped in front of the tavern where she worked.
Yes, I am indeed home.
She smiled. She entered silently, cleaning the last 2 remaining tables and lit a candle on the table near the window. That particular table was well known. At the tavern, people fought to have the table with the most beautiful view of the harbor. She grabbed paper and an inkwell and began to write down what had happened. Eleanor didn't leave out any details. She wouldn't let this place so dear to her heart be closed. As the night slowly faded, the gentle light of dawn started to emerge on the horizon. The silence of the night was gradually broken by the discreet murmurs of the awakening world. The birds, initially timid, soon started their song. Eleanor was ready for a new adventure. The golden glint in her eyes faded, replaced by the shimmering sparkle of the sun on her face. She fell asleep peacefully on the table, a small smile on a serene face. She departed in peace. She was home.